Hey everyone, thank you all so much once again for tuning in to another episode of the Hue Capital Podcast with yours truly, Jerlisa, Juju, Fontaine. Per usual, I always have amazing guests on this podcast who are just really passionate about educating other people in regards to who they can be, what they can do. Opportunities are endless. Which one can attract you and which one should you take? So, I do want to welcome our lovely guest, Angelina Howard. So, quick story. Per usual, I have to tell you how I find these people. So, there was somebody, his name is Tim Salau. He is the founder of Guide app. He's a very enthusiastic, very passionate individual. I've been following him because every time I see a picture of him smiling, it makes me smile. So I think people who exude that kind of like positive energy, you definitely want to follow them. And then one time I was just scrolling through his stories and I saw this beautiful person, like here she is. I'm like, oh, who's this Angelina girl? So I click on her page. She's absolutely gorgeous. Then I find out she works at Amazon. She's also leading an ERG. I'm like, I need to like follow her. Like, this is the kind of person that I'm trying to look up to, get a sense of like who she is, where she's going. Because in reality, we're never 100% sure about where we are going, right? You have this whole life plan. You think you know what you do, and then you don't. So I wanted to follow her, have been ever since. And now that I have a podcast, I said, yeah, I need to have her here. Like, I want to learn more about her. I know my audience wants to learn more about her. So let's bring her. So before I chat on for too long, once again, I have to brag about my lovely guests. So here we go. All right. So Angelina Howard is currently a senior product manager at Amazon, where she drives product features and roadmap prioritization for digital software and video games. Angelina transitioned into product management in 2015 and has been passionate about not only increasing accessibility in all products, but also increasing the knowledge and representation of product management. And I know y'all hear that word product management a lot because we're going to talk about that especially. Outside of her PM role, she is the president of the Black Employee Network, an employee resource group at Amazon, where she focuses on being an advocate for inclusion and diversity, inclusion first, while growing a community inside and outside of Amazon. Outside of work at Amazon, Angelina also serves as a freelance instructor, adjunct professor at the University of Arkansas. She is a speaker as well as a business and corporate diversity consultant. Angelina loves to travel and learn about different cultures where there is so much to discover, and we're going to discover a lot through her. While her blog includes posts about product management and working in tech, she also shares her latest adventures so that you can get to know more about her personality. So once again, Angelina Howard, thank you so much for being here today. Please fill in the gaps. Please tell us more about yourself.
I think you did a really great job.
Thank you.
So, yes, I'm super happy to be here. Love Tim. Similar to you, whenever you see Tim, he is just radiating happiness and positivity. So when I first met Tim, I think someone posted him on their story and I followed Tim and he happened to move to Seattle. So that's going to be one of my resources is make sure you follow people on social media because that's how you meet people, but also get those positive vibes and you learn so much. So I'm happy you found me. I'm happy to be here. And thank you for that awesome introduction.
Of course, of course, of course. So first things first, we're going to kind of walk through this interview as if it's like your life journey up to like now, right? So what we are going to do is we will start with your college experience. We don't want to go back to like your 3, 4, 5-year-old stories because, you know, yeah. So let's start with college. Tell us where you went, what did you study, and who did you think you were going to become at that time?
Whew. Yes. So I went to Colorado State University. I studied corporate finance and supply chain management. I will take it a little step to like my senior year, and that will help kind of illustrate how wild my journey has been. When I was, you grow up, everyone tells you good grades and you're going to go to college. I'm a first generation student. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I loved history. So I told my aunt, and she's not like my real aunt, but she took me under her wings. And I was like, I'm going to go to school and study history. And she was like, well, okay, what are you going to do with that? And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, I think I want to be a lawyer. And they say you can study whatever you want to go to law school. So that's what I'm going to do. And she's like, let's have plans in place. What if you don't go to law school immediately? And it's so important to have people there that help guide you during that path, because I would have studied history and I surely did not go to law school. So I'm happy that I had someone there, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I looked at her and she worked in business and she's like, well, what do you like? I'm like, I like math. So I'm like, okay, business, go to business school. My uncle, her husband, he worked from home. He was a CIS major. I was
Mm.
like, I'm gonna do that because he works at home. He make a lot of money. That
Mm-hmm.
sounds great. I didn't understand that CIS was engineering.
Mm.
So a lot of things that I was exposed to in high school, I didn't really know what those career paths were. I loved MySpace. I loved putting together profiles. I would stay up late at night doing that, but no one told me that I was finding engineering. So I just wanted to set that as a base of going into college. I didn't really know what my opportunities were. I didn't know what I could do to take things I was passionate about and actually make money off of them, make that a career. Had I known, I'd probably be an engineer. So I just want to really set that base. So I went into college as a CIS major. I took my first CIS class. I hated it, and I wish I would have stuck with it because everyone told me that class is just terrible in
Mhm.
general. Like that class does not actually tell you what CIS is. So I did CIS. I changed my major to CS in marketing. I realized I didn't like marketing, so now I was corporate finance. And then I added supply chain my second semester of my junior year. And I did that actually like a week before classes started because I looked at a job description and I realized supply chain role sounded cool. So that was really my time in college where I was just really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had, you had your guidance counselors, but they really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I did not explain what
Mhm.
it is that I wanted to do. So I eventually graduated with my degree in corporate finance and supply chain management. And I found that I really loved supply chain just based off of my professor and internships. So I figured it out at the
At the end,
very end. And I'm
right?
happy that I figured it out. But that's to say people who are still trying to figure it out, it's not a quick and fast journey for everyone, and it's okay.
I love that. And I also love how you put the experience working with MySpace into perspective because it's true, right? Like a lot of us didn't really put it in perspective that we were really over here in HTML and really coding.
Yeah.
Even for me, like I never considered myself a techie, but when I think back to everything I was just toying with and playing with, I'm like, wait, I had some exposure to this. Like I was doing something. I made sure I got
Yeah.
some into my profile and it wasn't that easy, but I figured it out. Why didn't I think that this was something that could be a job? Right. But
None
no,
of us did.
exactly. And in reality, now we know that, but it would have been nicer if we knew that before. And I also love how you put it back in perspective, how maybe you would have stayed as a CS major if you knew that everyone just didn't like that class. And it's so funny because as a prior pre-med student, that class for you was organic chemistry for us, right? Organic chemistry was like this domino effect course where it's so challenging. The professors usually hate you and it just knocks you off your path. But I do love that even though you didn't continue with the degree, you ended up graduating with a degree in a field that you actually like and one that you actually enjoyed. And I think that that was really cool and powerful that you were able to like lay that out for us. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you. That
Thank
was
you.
great. Of course. So I want to talk a little bit more about like your transition, right? So you were at college, you finally figured out what you want to do, you did the internships, cool. Now you're in the real world where, people aren't going to hold your hands. It's not really college anymore. And even then, people don't want to hold your hand. So what were some challenges that you faced early in the working experience?
Yes, so a lot of people don't realize my very first job out of undergrad was Amazon. So I really got thrown into like this
You
big
were in.
company. Yes.
Mhm.
So I moved to Seattle. I didn't know anyone in Seattle. Everyone tells you Seattle's super depressing. It just rains all the time. So just imagine coming out of undergrad, moving to a city that you've never really been to except for your interview, not knowing anyone, and then you're working at this massive company. And honestly, I didn't even realize how big of a deal working at Amazon was. I have to be honest. I was like,
That
okay, so
was
yeah, and I didn't view it as a tech company, honestly. I viewed it as a supply chain company. So when people were like, oh, you went straight into tech, I was like, I guess so. I guess I did. But I didn't view it that way. I knew that they did supply chain. I went there for supply chain. Even when they talked about e-commerce, I still like retail supply chain. So
huge.
nothing about it when the first probably couple of months that I actually viewed myself as, oh, I'm in tech, I work in tech. That didn't really cross my mind. So when me getting into tech was very much like an accident. It was very indirect.
Mhm.
So getting in, Amazon is very big on ownership. If you look at our leadership principles, so when they say that, they mean that. They're like, so my first brand was Microsoft. So anything that you saw on Amazon in terms of like Surface, mice, keyboards, it was my job to procure that, make sure the marketing was on point, making sure that their product detail pages were together, launching new products. That was all me. And I was what, 22, 23 years old, having to manage a Microsoft at Amazon. And it was my job. That was literally my job, was the brand owner for Microsoft on Amazon. So when you think about how much responsibility that is, and then add on top of, I don't see people who look like me.
Yep.
And not that my team wasn't supportive, but you start to feel imposter syndrome of like, how am I here? And I think I've always had that even in college where I'm like, oh, I got that. That must have been by chance. Thank God, it's a blessing. But not really believing that I could do it because I could. So also is moving through that was really difficult, but eventually it's really having to build up the confidence. I'm like, okay, there's no way that I just keep getting, these awards or accolades off of sheer chance. Like, okay, no, I clearly know something. I clearly know what I'm doing. And that's something that I also try to make sure when I talk to young girls, especially young Black girls, is like, don't doubt yourself or don't second guess your accomplishments. And that was something that I had to get over. But that was really hard transitioning from college into this workspace and having a huge level of ownership and managing a large amount of business. Was really, it was a lot. But I think a lot of it was just finding that confidence in myself, but also finding mentors who saw that I was didn't have that confidence in myself, and they put that and they poured into me, and that to me was really important.
And I want to follow up on two things that you said, right? The first thing is the imposter syndrome part, right? When you are one, right, or of few people who look like yourself in a certain workspace, for you feel like you got there by chance, right? And you're the person who actually accomplished that goal. But in reality, the people around you look at you as, maybe she honestly did get here by chance, or maybe people who look like her aren't often supposed to be in this space. So they embrace you, but it comes back to this point that I always talk about with being the token Black person or being the token Latinx person, right? It's like, if there is only one or two amidst like 10 to 15 people, the reality becomes, even if you get past the imposter syndrome, people who are not a part of our community may see it as, there isn't supposed to be so many of you in one space, or everybody's not really smart enough to get here the way you are in honor.
Oh, you're different.
You're different, right? And that's for me why I'm really big on D&I in particular, is I really hate the concept of tokenism. Because what happens is that, luckily for you, you're humble and you realize, okay, here's the problem. I'm just here. It's me with everybody else who doesn't look like me. And for you, you realize, I want to solve that as a problem by trying to figure out, how do I get more people who look like me in this space? So thankfully for you, you're humble enough to see that as a problem. But in other situations, whether it's that person's fault or not, because they are the only one, they may start to adapt to this mindset where it's like, well, I worked hard to get here. If someone who looks like me didn't, maybe that's their fault. Like, maybe they weren't smart enough. And now you start looking at your own people as a problem. And that's the reason why I think that D&I is so important, because not everyone's going to be on Angelina's wavelength where it's a problem to solve. For some people, it's, I was supposed to be one of the few who got here. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, and when people subscribe to that, it really, it grinds my gears, because sometimes people are just like, oh, it's that crab in a barrel mentality of like, well, I got here and I have to make sure that I excel and I have to worry about myself, because it's already hard being the only person here and I don't have time to make sure that there's other people there. And to me, anything that I do is like, how can I struggle through this? How can I make sure that someone else doesn't struggle through it? Because I'm really big on, my parents had made it through something. I made it through something, and I want the people after me to be better than I am. My mom wanted me to be better than she is, so we can't have that mentality. If I have a seat at the table, I probably can't give you that seat right now, but I'm going to make sure that I'm taking your voice and speaking it when I have the seat at the table, and making sure that I'm laying this foundation so that you have a seat too. Right. And that's what I think about when I'm able to sit with some of our senior leaders, is that I want them to see what's possible. Angelina is not the only one. So when you think about like, oh my gosh, like, she's so great, and yes, and you know what, there's more people like me. So I want to make sure that I am showing them what's possible, so that they can say, you know what, maybe we should get more people like Angelina. And that's what I want to happen. And for people who don't have that mindset, I don't understand it, and I definitely don't like that they prescribe to that at all.
And the reality is, when you bring in other Angelinas, it doesn't discredit the fact that the original isn't as great. Like, she's still great. She's still superb. She still produces quality, amazing work. That's the reason why you want more like her, right? It's not to say that we have to replace this individual. We need to have more like this individual on our team if we want to see max growth, max revenue. Whatever the target is, you want to max that or exceed that. And the reality is, when you have different people at the table, you can reach that and surpass whatever that goal actually looks like. So that's why I'm really proud of what you're doing and just everything that you represent, period. And
Thank you.
The other question I had to ask as a flashback to what you were talking about was, you described your experience working in supply chain, but particularly around obviously being responsible for Microsoft products. So just kind of briefly explain, what exactly is supply chain? Like, what does that entail outside of like your personal role?
Whew. I feel the same when people ask me like, what is product management? I'm like,
whew. About that too. Trust me. What is supply chain, first of all?
I think the best way to describe supply chain is it's the process of moving goods from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. But I think it's, when you think about it from like the very beginning of the supply chain, you think about the raw goods. Now, the raw goods can be a variety of things. You can think about coffee, you can think about clothes, and that is like the manufacturing side. So what are the raw goods and how do you manufacture that product? So that in itself is its own type of supply chain. But then you also have, how do you take these finished goods and how do you get them to the consumers? And in terms of like e-commerce, you now have it from a manufacturer. Let's say that's Microsoft. They have their own supply chain to build the product. Let's say it's a Surface. Then now they have that and it's in their distribution centers. And now they have to get it out to the networks, the retailers. Mm-hmm. So that in itself is another part of the supply chain. You think about the logistics. So now you have the inbound logistics of taking it from a distribution center or a DC and taking it to fulfillment center. That can be Amazon, that can be Walmart, Target. They have the logistics part. So now it's in their fulfillment centers or their distribution centers, whatever it is that they want to call it. And now you have the outbound part of it when you're taking it to consumers. And I feel like that's a very that
was a great description. I don't know why you felt like I think you beautifully described that. And then just to kind of like quickly get a glimpse into, what are like soft and hard skills that someone who is a supply chain manager need to have? Like, what is that?
I think a big one is how you have to have holistic thinking. Sometimes people really focus on just their part of whatever it is. So say you're a marketing manager or you're like, well, I only focus on the logistics part. I only focus on the transporting, but you can't. You have to make sure that you have a clear view and vision of how everything impacts things. And I don't think a lot of people have that. So to me, that's the biggest skill that you need, is to be able to look at things holistically and then work backwards from that. But then also being strategic. Supply chain, especially think about during a pandemic, it's not always going to be the same. You have to be able to think strategically and how you're going to, refresh and reinvent what your processes are. So I would say definitely being a strategic thinker and thinking holistically, but being able to also work backwards from that to a specific problem and figure out how you're solving it will solve it for everyone. So it's kind of those, like what my professor used to say, little wiggles make big wiggles. It was his way of explaining it to us. So those are the skills I would say people need for supply chain. But also I think those skills have also helped me with being a better product manager, because you also have to look at what are you doing that impacts so many other teams in order to produce for your consumer, your end customer, whether that's external, internal customers. So I think that's what has linked me to be a product manager too.
And I could tell you speak a lot because you literally answered the next question. Like, I could tell you're out there on these panels answering these questions because she already caught my flow. You literally answered the next question, right? In regards to what are skills that even a product manager should have. And what we're going to do is we're going to transition. So in 2015, that's when Angelina said, I'm hopping into this product management lifestyle. So being that you already jumped ahead, and I love it because that just tells me, once again, Angelina's ahead of the game. How did that even happen? How did you go from supply chain to product management?
Yes. So I came into Amazon as a brand specialist and then an in-stock manager, which is a supply chain manager. And with that, I had a lot of projects. So I essentially just looked at what my last two roles were. And I'm like, what are the things that I liked about them? But then, everyone started throwing out this PM word, like PMs, everyone should be a PM. PM is great. Then I'm like, oh, I heard PMs make more money too. This sounds great. And I remember talking to my manager and I said, I want to be a PM. And he's like, what kind of PM?
You're like, I don't know.
I'm like, I don't know. He's like,
More than that.
program, product,
Mhm.
project. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I'm like, I don't know. I just know I want to be a PM. And he really encouraged me to go and talk to a program manager, go talk to a product manager. At Amazon, we don't really have a lot of project managers, so I didn't talk to a project manager. But so I talked to program, I talked to product, and I'm like, okay, I think I want to do product. I go back to him and I'm like, product. And he's like, what kind of product do you want to do? And I'm like,
oh my God, I got to do more research.
Yeah, so people don't realize there's so many different types of product managers, especially when you're in a company like Amazon or like Microsoft, where you have like digital products. So you think about how do you launch something with like engineers. So I think about them as like the product managers that actually work with engineers. But then you have product managers who are working on physical products, who are actually building like the Alexa devices, Amazon Basics, Surfaces, Google Homes. Those are product managers who are figuring out what needs to go into this product.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, let me go talk to some more people. So was really talking to people and understanding, okay, what does your job entail beyond the job description? So from there, I realized, okay, I still love supply chain, but I also love doing like the project management aspect of being an in-stock manager. But when I was a vendor manager or brand specialist, I loved figuring out what the go-to-market strategy is for these new products and how to get it to customers. So that's what made me decide I wanted to be a product manager. And then I also always had an interest in engineering. We go back to the beginning of the interview where I'm like, I love tech. I don't know if that's for me. But so now I have an opportunity to kind of be tech adjacent. So I looked at different roles and I made sure that I didn't just jump completely into products. So my first product role was on a team called Manufacturing on Demand. So it encompassed supply chain. I was still doing product work, but I was still also doing like cross collaboration with other teams, and it also can project management. So I basically pulled from things of my interest and my past experience, and that's how I jumped into product management. So a long story, but that's how I got there. It wasn't I'm just going to apply. My manager, which he is great and he's my mentor now, he's like, well, why? What about that? Go talk to someone. I can tie you into this. Go talk to someone on this team and on this team. And that really helped me make sure that I wasn't just jumping into something that I didn't know what I was doing, but at least I could bring some type of experience with, okay, this is manufacturing. I have an ops background, so I can help in this. And I've done X, Y, and Z. And I really made sure that when I talked to the hiring manager, I told her, like, I can do this and this. I have all the experience and expertise of a product manager in all these different roles. I just haven't had the product role. But if you take a bet on me, I know I can.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you've done all these things. She's like, so I think you got it. And I'm like, great, let's just try it out.
And I do want to highlight a couple of things, right? The first thing is you were brave enough to go up to your manager and express interest in something that was a little different than your current role, right? And I think the reality is, for a lot of people, maybe they have a strange relationship with their managers, right? Maybe they don't feel like I want to come to my manager and let them know what my next steps are, because maybe I don't know if that person actually has my best interest at heart. So how did you develop that relationship with your manager where you knew you can express maybe what your next steps would look like?
And I think that is probably something that's a little bit unique to Amazon, at least within like my org, was that your manager is really there to develop you. So they're trying to figure out what your next step is so they can make sure that you're not only, impacting the business positively, but also making sure that you're prepared for your next role. So people at Amazon move a lot. So at that time, I'd already been on the team for enough time. And he's like, it's time for you to figure out what's next. And at first I was like, oh, I'm going to go do this within like our greater org. And he's like, or you can try something outside of the org, because he was really invested in my development, where he's like, I want to make sure that you aren't just pigeonholing yourself into what's comfortable. Like, make sure that you're pushing the bounds, but don't go too far. So I was like, okay, how do I do a product role that still has some of the things that I already know? Versus like if I would have went and tried to be a product manager in, let's say, AWS and work on the cloud, I don't have no experience in the cloud. I had no product experience, and that would have been a really big leap. So I tried to make sure that it wasn't too comfortable, but still new, and he encouraged that. So he was a really great manager. But I think in general, Amazon does that, but he really took it a step further and like, hey, like, let's really talk about what your plan is. Let me make sure that you're not just
Getting
jump into.
comfortable, staying complacent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he also, it's like, let me make sure that you know what a product and program manager role
Yes.
is. And there's a team that reached out to me at the same time I got the offer for the other role, and it was with the manager that I knew. And I'm like, I think I'm going to go over there. And he's like, that's program. And I'm like, aren't they? They're close. He was like, no.
So wait, describe it. So what is program manager? What is project manager? And then my third question we're gonna get to afterwards. But answer those two first.
So project, I'm probably not the best person to explain project because I haven't really interacted with a lot of project managers. We don't have a lot of project managers at Amazon. So I can give you like a textbook definition, but so I probably won't explain that one. But from on somebody that's a project manager to be like, you had that guest and she didn't know what she was talking about. That is not project management.
Transparency. I love it. At least you're honest.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not gonna fake the funk on that one. So when I think about program managers, and they can definitely vary based off of company, because at Microsoft, program managers are their version of product managers. I think it's strange, but so yeah. So at Amazon, product managers really work closely with engineers. At least most of them are, and there's other instances where you work on a physical product. So you're really ideating and looking at what are the customer needs. So you're working with your UX designers and researchers, figuring out what the customer problem is. From that, you're working from here's the customer problem, or here's the business problem that you're trying to solve. And sometimes it's both. Here's my customer problem. Here's how I can solve it for customers and the business, and really figuring that out. So that's your job as a product manager, is to deliver for customers, but also making sure that it's something that works for your business. And then you are setting up the requirements and working closely with the tech team to develop it. So that's a high level explanation of like what product managers are. So you're really, I consider it the intersection between the business, tech, and then also delivering and delighting your customers, which means you also kind of a product designer as well. So it's all encompassing. You're basically all the things. And some people consider it, you're the CEO of a product. I don't necessarily describe it that way, but I can see how people say that. Whereas a program manager, you work closely with product. You work closely. Sometimes we may have an engineering team, you may not, but you're really continuing on something that maybe a product manager has launched, and you're thinking about how do we sustain it, how do we come up with new ideas. And sometimes product managers do that as well, but I really think of the program managers as you're literally managing a program versus a actual product or a feature. So that's like the best way that I can describe it. Then you have technical program managers who are working closely with product managers, and they are usually involved for like really technical projects. And I guess they're more so considered like technical project managers, because they really are managing lots of different work streams. And I'm happy I have a TPM now, because
like, I need that. Yep.
I had a product last year and I was like, yeah, I'm not a TPM. I can do it, but that is not me. It's not for me.
I love the transparency. Honestly, you have to know yourself. That's the truth.
Yeah, I realized I can do it. I can step into it when I need to. I can pull from it, but that is not my long-term. I don't want to do it all the time.
Right.
So I know I have the skill, and I love that I have that skill for like certain products, but I realized quickly, because I thought about moving into a TPM role, that you know what, not for me. Good to know. And now I know how to do it if I need to, but that's not my full-time job. So
right. And what I want to talk about after that is, so you're a product manager, right? You're at Amazon. You're leading a team. You're a senior product manager. Excuse me. Put the senior in front of it. Now, you are responsible for a group of people, right? So kind of describe like your team. How many people are there? Who's on your team? And like, what are your management skills? Like, how do you run your show?
Yes. So I feel like Amazon, and so I'm a senior product manager. I don't have any direct reports. So my scope as a senior product manager, my scope is just wider in terms of what my responsibility is. So I don't have any direct reports, but I work closely with an engineering team. So now that I'm a senior PM, I work closely with our senior engineers or SD3s, and I really help run our sprint planning with our senior development manager, to the point where we have grooming, and he just doesn't talk much. He's just like, y'all go ahead. Angelina, what do you want? Team, what size is that? And it's really given me experience of now I can help manage an engineering team, and I love that. I love working with my engineers. I also work closely with our UX researchers and make sure that the products that we're building is something that customers want. Absolutely. My products are customer facing, so sometimes you have the business, and that's the hard part about being a product manager, is they're like, this is the product that we need. And I'm like, no, you're trying to make money. And I don't think customers care about that at all, actually. So It's
That's
finding those things and like, what do customers care about that would also drive money for the business versus what would drive money for the business that customers probably could care less about. And I want us to make sure that we're utilizing our resources as efficiently as possible, because engineering resources are expensive and they're not unlimited like people think that they are.
no, it's
So
true.
it's finding that balance. So that's what my team is. My engineering team, I want to say it's 12 of them right now.
Mhm.
And then we have one software development manager, I have one TPM, and then we have a QA manager. So
Mm.
that's my team. And then we have a shared resource for our UX team.
Awesome. So another quick question. So you mentioned QA, right? So people always hear QA. They're like, what is that? It's quality assurance. What does that person do?
Yes. So our QA, or she's like, I'm a QAE, quality assurance engineer. I'm like, I'm not going to forget the engineer. I'm sorry. I'm QAE. So
Yeah.
don't get mad at me. QAE. So she really, when we're developing products, I make sure that we cut what we call a SIM, or take it to her and say, hey, here's the product. It's now on our roadmap. Here's what the timeline is. Working back from our timeline means to make sure that we have enough time for you to do testing for it. So she'll come up with a test plan, and she will, let's say we're launching something on our product detail pages. She will come up with like, I have to do it from this browser. I got to do it from Chrome. I got to do it from Safari. I got to do it from Edge. I remember one day I asked them, like, you tested in Explorer? They're like, no, and we're not going to. I'm like,
Okay.
I'm not gonna push. I'm not gonna
Got
push
it.
it. I trust y'all. But she makes sure that she tests it in so many different like environments. She tests it on an iPhone. She tests it on Android, making sure that any type of possibility that the customer may interact with this product, making sure that it works efficiently. And then she will cut bugs to us. So she's like, this didn't work. And it's making sure that before we launch a product to our customers, we have checked everything possible, and then we're looking at what bugs can we fix in the back end that customers may not see while we're doing like a web lab or A/B testing, and which things can I not launch this product with until we get it resolved. So that is what she does. We're launching something next week, and I was like, woo, we're close to launch. We did the demo, and then she's like, start putting these meetings on my calendar where we meet 3 times a week, where she's like, we're gonna have bug triaging, and I was like, there's no bugs, we're good.
We're great. We're great.
No, she was like, this button does this and this when I click on it. And I'm like, well, when will a customer do that though? Like, I'm like asking her, like, what are those instances? And she really dives deep into like chances where I'm like, I don't know if a customer will ever get to that, but because you found it, y'all, we got to fix it. And that means we have to delay a launch. We would delay a launch. So that's what she does, is making sure that she's that last line of defense of making sure products that are launched are working, it's the best customer experience, and catching those bugs and making sure that now we're doing bug triaging. And as a product manager, I'm the one that says that experience is okay, that experience is not okay. So that is the QAE's job.
And you beautifully explained it. To everybody listening, once again, if you're trying to be a PM, right, a product manager, because there's 3 different PMs, be aware of who's going to be on your team. Once again, don't call them a QA, call them a QAE. Don't forget the engineer.
Don't forget the engineer.
And you will also have your other engineers. You will have a UX researcher. You will have UX designers. So get a sense of like, what would your team actually look like, so that when you're walking into an interview, you know how to talk about how to actually collaborate with them. And I do want to quickly touch on that before we get into the final stage of our interview. I know you can't tell us the specifics, but just give us an idea of like, if I am someone who's a product manager and I'm preparing for an interview, what are a couple of questions I should be prepared for or start thinking about? Give us a little something.
Yes. So I actually go through this on my blog. So if you check out my blog, I give some top questions that you should ask. So quick plug. But one of the things that I tell people a lot, to the point earlier, is understanding what type of product role it is. Yes. Because unfortunately, a lot of people know that PM is like that hot job. And I have seen some people post product roles and they're not actual product roles. They're like, oh, you want to be a product manager? I'm a title as a product manager. And they may even pay you like a product manager. But I think that is super risky, because if you decide to switch roles to go to a different company and you're like, well, yeah, I'm the senior product manager, and you go to this other company and then you have no idea what a product manager is. So it's making sure you understand what it is that you're doing. So the question that I make sure people ask is really dive into like, so how big is the team? what is my scope? Who owns the roadmap? And sometimes it may not be you because it depends on how the company is structured, or if you're coming in as an entry level product manager, you probably don't have as much influence over the roadmap. But you want to ask those things. How's the team structured? Do we have shared resources? Do I have my own engineering team, or do I have to go to another team to get engineering resources? And that's actually a good skill that you would want to figure out. I love having my own engineers. Makes things so much easier. But that negotiation standpoint of when you have to go and fight for engineers, because I do have to do that sometimes, that's a great skill and it's a great experience. It's not the funnest, but it's a great skill to develop. So those are questions I would definitely say to ask. I also tell anyone, whether you're a product manager or not, also understand where you fit within your leadership chain. Who is your skip level? Is your manager the same level as you? Is that important to you? Is your skip level your director? How far are you from your director? How far are you from your VP? How much visibility do you have in your products? Are the products that you're working on customer facing, or they're internal? How important is it for you to be able to tell your friends and family the products that you're working on? And for me, I love to be able to explain what my product is, and I can be like, hey, I launched this. Look at it. Versus some people can't do that. They're working on internal tools and they're so happy with that. They want to work on tools that make the lives better for other employees. So I think it's understanding what is your product, the scope of it, where do you fit within leadership? And if you want to work on a tech team, understanding how closely you work with your engineers, who runs these meetings. If you don't want to work that close with engineers, again, it's a good question to ask of like, do I just dictate these things to them, or do I sit down with them and, mentor them? And I've been able to mentor engineers from like a product and business standpoint, because some people don't realize that they actually do want to understand like business. They want to understand what it is that they're building. And I've really been a big advocate for making sure that we're keeping them in the loop. So in my business, like requirement docs, I put the financials in there. They're like, I want to know how much money it is that I'm building. And I'm like, oh, y'all care about that? Oh, we can talk about it. And they're like, what does OPS mean? And I'm like, ordered product sales. They're like, ooh, okay, can you explain that to me? So now it's a mutual relationship where I'm like, well, y'all can help me understand some more of this coding stuff. And like, what does this mean? What is JSP? Okay, what is the Thimish draft? What does that even mean? And they're like, okay, we'll help you understand that, but can you help us understand like what contribution profit is? And I'm like, y'all don't know what that is? But have to remember that they're engineers, they're not business people. So we're learning a lot from each other. So I think seeing what that opportunity is within your interview, I think is also important too. So
that was so beautiful. I love how you mentioned the power of collaboration, right? It's like, even though it's not in their job description to understand the business of things, they're telling you like, I actually want to understand it better. And for you, you want to learn more about their world as well. So there's an exchange there, right? It's a mutual benefit. And I love that you award your time to that. So we appreciate you. Now, let's talk about D&I again. Let's kind of end off there. So you started the ERG. When exactly did you start it? How did it even come about, the process? Walk us through it.
Yes. So I did not start Ben. Ben was founded in 2005. It was started by Gino White in 2005, and he actually asked our CEO, Jeff Bezos, why don't we have a community for Black employees? And he was like, you started. Very Amazonian. Okay. I was like, oh, there's a problem. Thank you for identifying it.
Go fix it.
Let me know how you go fix it. Yeah. So that's when Ben was started in 2005. So I became the president of Ben last year, so beginning of 2019. But I was previously the networking director. So I got involved in Ben. So like I said, I moved to Seattle. I didn't know anyone. I definitely didn't have any Black friends for probably the first 6 months, which was really, really difficult. Yes, very, very hard, because that's when a lot of things happen, especially the killing of Mike Brown happened when I was in Seattle, and to not have anyone there that I could talk to. I can call my friends, but it's not the same. That was really difficult for me. But I started having like events around Seattle because I wanted to be able to meet people. So one of my friends, we started something called the Socialites, and we said, okay, people can have parties at night, but you can't really talk to people at the parties. You can't talk to people at the club. So we would have things like brunches and like, what are things that we really enjoyed that people can come together. And it was something that I felt I wish that Ben did internally. And someone who's really my close friends now, she's like, you can just put on those same events that you do outside of Amazon and do them at Amazon. So I was like, oh, you're right. Why should I sit and wait for someone to do the things that I wish that they were doing, and I can just do it myself? And maybe other people will also enjoy the stuff that I wish that we were doing. And a lot of things came from that. So that was really my intro into Ben. So then I helped ideate us doing the Black ERG holiday party. So we had a holiday party where all the Black ERGs, so you have Blacks at Microsoft, you have Boeing, Nordstrom, we all had a holiday party because I don't know how familiar you are with Seattle, but people do not dress up.
Oh, I heard about that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so we're like, okay, we're gonna have a reason for us to get dressed up, which we don't really need a reason. So we're like, holiday party is gonna be formal, and just to have all of us in the year off together was super beautiful. So having events like that, then again, finding another reason for us to get dressed up and then give people money. We had the Black Excellence Gala, so we're like, all right, we're gonna donate money to local orgs. We're gonna have a gala, so it's gonna be black tie. So doing those things is really what I found a lot of passion is how do I bring Black people together at Amazon and help people understand our culture and celebrate our culture, but also making sure that people have a way of finding other Black people that's not just at work, because your community can't just be at work. So then also figuring out how do we bring together all of the different Black employees at other tech companies. And that was what really got me involved in Ben. And then eventually became the president.
Yes, I'm so proud of you. Honestly, I'm a huge supporter of ERGs. I feel like, so when I was student government president, right, I realized that we had a lot of issues with diversity and inclusion, and I was passionate about it there. But when I graduated, I realized that the same problems we were having on our campus is the same exact problems people were having at their corporations. And the reality is, most of these corporations look for people who have college degrees, right? And they're coming from a problematic environment, and they're bringing that same culture back into the workforce. And that's the reason why the work doesn't stop. So when I think about ERGs, I think about them as like little student governments, but now it's post-student, and now it's real governments, right, in a company, ensuring that everybody feels welcome, protected, and everybody's growing, right? Everyone has a chance to grow. So that's the reason why I love what you're doing in terms of being a leader in the ERG, and just understanding that there is so much to fix, and you're taking on the initiative to solve that. So
Yeah.
my follow-up on that is, people keep talking about, well, okay, we have D&I amongst the employees. Obviously, we have products to focus on and money to make. So how does developing diversity and inclusion amongst your employees actually do the same thing for the products? Like, what's the benefit?
Oh yes. So
Question. So have fun.
So I think we talked about this a little bit before we started, and you touched on it too, of the companies focus on the diversity part and inclusion. To me, and I've been really trying to push for, it's not D&I, it's IND, because you can bring as many Black people or Black customers to your site, to your company, but if it's not inclusive, they will not stay. You cannot retain them. Exactly. So like, you have to make sure that the culture is there and it's inclusive, and then not only will people stay, but people will just organically be like, oh, they're thriving there, this company really cares. They're just gonna come anyway. So I always say, like, it's IND, and that's someone, my mentor at Amazon, he's one of our VPs of HR, and he's like, it's not D&I, it's inclusion and diversity, because we can't bring people here if it's not a good culture. They're not going to want to stay, and people who leave are going to be like, it's terrible. He's like, now you really have a hard recruiting problem. So it's both. So from Ben's standpoint, we think about culture in terms of how do we make sure that we are inclusive and our workforce is diverse, but also how do we take our learnings and what we know, because we're customers too. So how do we also lend what our experiences are and build that into the product, but also advocate for certain products? So we have things like Amazon launched textures and hues, where there's a conversation that came from a bin meeting of, Black people with textured hair shop differently for their hair. So we can't just think that, because we have Black hair care products that it's the same. No, we shop differently. And to me, that's also an example of inclusion, of recognizing that we can't think that all people shop the same. Now we have to build things that are very specific to certain people. And that doesn't mean that you're excluding anyone. It's that you're recognizing that people with different diverse backgrounds have diverse ways of doing things. So to me, that's an example of inclusion. And a lot of things, especially with, a lot of companies like, we care about diversity. I think we're going to start seeing so you're going to start seeing a lot of, I think, more companies really hammering in on not just thinking about diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity internally, but also with the products that they're building. You think about strong Black lead, like those are things that it's diverse, but also saying this is inclusive. I know that there are people who have Black stories, and how to make sure we're telling Black stories. So that's how I view, and from a Ben standpoint, we bring those things to our leaders, because unfortunately, if you look at any numbers in tech, there's not a lot of Black leaders who are making a lot of these decisions, but it's about them being open and saying, we don't know.
Right.
So we need to listen to our employees who have that experience and how do we build out those type of products. So those are something that Amazon had done before. We have like our own little like widget on Fire TV. Like these are recommendations from like our Black employees here at Black Stories. So that's like a way that like you're translating the work that you're doing internally to make sure that it's also for customers. And I think Amazon has started doing that. Netflix has done a really great job of that. So I would think we're going to especially see it more now, but it's really taking those learnings and not just applying it from a employee side, but also customers. And I also try to tell people to think about diversity of thought. So the diversity doesn't always just mean, oh, you need to have people who are Black or women. Even those people have diversity of thought. One of my close friends were both Black product managers. She grew up in Chicago. I grew up in Denver and in St. Louis. Our perspectives on life is so different, and we can bring different things to how you're building products, but also thinking about, and this is something that I'm really trying to get stronger at and become a bigger advocate for, is accessibility. I am an able-bodied person, and as a privilege that I have, and especially with everything being virtual, I'm realizing how difficult things are. Like the fact that a lot of streaming things do not have closed captions, like how are we able to have this interactive world and people can't actually interact with things? So how do I make sure that the products that I'm building has the right colors? So when I'm just did a demo last week and I'm like, we can't have those two colors next to each other. People who are colorblind, they can't see that. And people on my team are like, oh, that's a quick fix. But it's making sure that we're educated on those things. As a product manager, I have to make sure that I know those things because my engineers might not. I feel like everyone should, but how do I make sure that I'm being that voice and not just thinking about diversity from who I am and what I identify with? I need to take my privilege to also speak up for other people too. It's the intersectionality of things. So that's how I think about it from like a product building standpoint. In my current role is I build customer facing things. How do I make sure that whatever I'm building, as much as I possibly can, make sure the initial launch is accessible? So those are like different things. And I feel like that was a long answer. I've been giving you very long answers.
That was an amazing answer. Honestly, you answered any other sub question I would have had throughout. Beautifully answered that. To everybody who's listening, I think that you all got a lot of information about product management, about supply chain management, about the tech world in general. Once again, getting an understanding of the interview process, acknowledging how to speak to your manager about the next steps in your career. Maybe your manager might be your future mentor. And if they're not, get out there and figure out who may be your mentor. Don't force it. Write people, hey, be my mentor, but develop real relationships, and you may end up finding someone who wants to be that for you. Also, inclusion, then diversity. If you're starting an ERG or supporting one, make sure you understand the difference and which one is actually a priority. There are so many things that we definitely learned throughout the course of this interview. I'm honestly mind blown, especially because I am interested in product management. So this was honestly amazing. One of my favorite interviews. I love this. And before I let you go, just give me a one-liner, two-liner, whatever. What does the future of tech look like? Something quick, a quick sum up.
I think the future of tech, honestly, is the people that survived through this pandemic. I feel like that's the real quick liner right there. What companies are thriving and what companies' growth is not artificial? Which ones are actually going to be able to sustain this growth? Because a lot of companies are thriving because, you know, everything's online, but which ones are actually taking this growth and reinventing themselves? And that's what the future of tech is going to be.
Body that answer. All right, everybody. So once again, there you have it. Angelina Howard, Senior Product Manager at Amazon, as well as the President of the Black Employee Resource Group. Thank you so much, Angelina.
Thank you so much for having me. And then also check the link in the bio for my Black-owned shirt. Gotta support my friends.
Everything will be in the description. So once again, her website with all the resources, the blogs will be there, as well as, is it Elion.com?
Yeah.
Right. Perfect. But it'll all be there. So once again, thank you all so much, and we will see you for the next episode.